Oh boy, that's much better. People still like that meme, right? Hey guys, Pigeon here. Things are gonna be a little bit different around here, now that I'm here. What does peak fiction mean to you? It can be a piece of media that someone or a group of people consider fantastic, the greatest of all time even. It can have many meanings to people. But what does it mean to me? What do I consider peak fiction? There are very few things I can consider peak fiction. Pizza Tower, Mega Man X4, mostly video games. Despite this, there's also very few movies I can consider peak fiction, mostly animated films. Films such as 2011's Rango and more recently 2023 Super Mario Bros. Movie are movies I can consider peak fiction because they're movies I thoroughly enjoy. And also because I sort of have a bias with these movies. Do whatever with that info, I guess. Another example of this, and also the topic of today's video, is 1978's Mystery of Mamo, also known as The Secret of Mamo, Lupin vs. the Clone, or simply Lupin III. Trust me, this movie has a lot of names. Mystery of Mamo is what I consider one of my personal favorite animated movies, and also possibly one of my favorite films of all time. However, to understand Mystery of Mamo, we must first understand what the hell a Lupin III is. To put it simply, Lupin III revolves around the titular main character, Arsène Lupin III, and his gang going on various different heists, whether it be to steal a treasure for themselves or for a good cause. Along the way, a man by the name of Inspector Zenigata is always out there to capture Lupin and lock him up in jail. And that's pretty much all I need to know about Lupin III. It's more often than not the same song and dance mostly every time. And despite it being a simple concept, I and a lot of others really like it. Not only this, but it also managed to get really popular in most other countries, most notably in Japan, where pretty much every piece of Lupin media originated. Movies, TV episodes, TV specials, OVAs, video games, patches, slot machines, etc., you name it. It's there. Also, probably because the entire series was made in Japan, so there's that. And also, probably the reason why we're probably not gonna get most Lupin media in America, so there's that too. The series was initially created in 1967 by Kazuhiko Kato, otherwise known by his pen name Monkey Punch, who started writing the manga during that year. As for the anime, that didn't really get its start until 1971 with the release of Part 1, which was produced by TMS Entertainment and aired on Yomiuri TV. But due to low ratings, Part 1 ended after only 23 episodes. Luckily, with reruns of Part 1 sparking in popularity, Part 2's production started, taking away the more serious tone of Part 1 and adopting a more zany style, much akin to the later episodes of Part 1. It's also worth mentioning that, at the time, Part 1 of the anime was considered the first adult-oriented animated series to ever air in Japan, mainly due to the themes present in the show, namely sex and violence. Sure, there were other adult-oriented animated projects back in the day, but in Japan, it was quite unheard of. Not only this, but fun fact, the Lupin anime is also quite notable for airing the first anime episode in stereo, more specifically episode 99 of the Part 2 anime, fighting Jigen, otherwise known as the Scattered Magnum. As for the characters themselves, there's 5 main characters, a small number for a main cast, but to give credit where credit is due, I personally find myself enjoying most of their antics, or at least came to appreciate what they did for the most part. There's Lupin III, also called Wolf, Rupon, Cliff, and Edgar in most iterations and dubs, the titular main character of the entire series, considered to be a sly thief who is the grandson of the famous Arsène Lupin, but his massive ego and constant lust for women often leads him into unexpected predicaments. There's Daisuke Jigen, also called Dan Dunn in most dubs, Lupin's right-hand man who typically uses firearms as his main go-to weapon. Oftentimes, Jigen tends to not be fond of Lupin's ideas when it comes to thievery at times. Goemon is another one of Lupin's cohorts, often called Samurai in most dubs. Boring name. His main skill is using his blade, the Zantetsuken sword, to pretty much slice through anything, such as planes and even freaking lightning in one of the movies. Initially in the series, Goemon was tasked to assassinate Lupin, but both Lupin and Goemon eventually grew to have a mutual respect with each other, and thus the main trio was formed. I say main trio because Lupin, Jigen, and Goemon are the most prominent characters in the series. However, I can't say the same for the other two personally. They're prominent, but they don't really help Lupin, Jigen, or Goemon in the slightest sometimes. Starting off with this, we have Lupin's love interest Fujiko Mine, often called Margot in most dubs. She's mainly like a wild card type of character. She can be a help at times, but for the most part she often tends to do her own thing, sometimes even betraying Lupin in the grand scheme of things. Despite this, she is often considered a deceitful one, as she uses her looks to take advantage of others through seduction. Finally, we have the best character in the entire series, at least to me, but I know there's others out there who are probably dedicated fans of this character. Inspector Zenigata, who is often called Detective Ed Scott in most dubs. Inspector Zenigata works for the ICPO, who spends most of, if not his entire life, trying to capture Lupin and stop him from trying to steal whatever treasure he's targeting. As for Zenigata's weapon of choice, it's handcuffs. As for Lupin and Zenigata's relationship, it's more akin to a sort of cat and mouse type of relationship, much more akin to Tom and Jerry. Despite Zenigata's efforts to capture Lupin, Lupin always comes out on top, but there's a few occasions where Zenigata does get the upper hand, but it can be very rare and scarce for situations like this to happen, and when it does happen, Lupin still comes out on top. Each character has their own little chemistry with each other, and I think that's why I really like each of the characters for the most part. Now you might be wondering, what does any of this have to do with Mystery of Mamo? Mystery of Mamo feels like a Lupin movie. Most of the character traits that the main characters have apply here, and surprisingly for a Lupin movie, it works really well. Mystery of Mamo was released during the production of the second TV series' lifespan, mainly in the year 1978, and was distributed by Toho along with being produced by TMS, the same company who's been producing the Lupin anime. Mystery of Mamo is considered the first animated Lupin movie. On the other hand, Strange Psychokinetic Strategy holds the title for being the first official Lupin movie ever released, which I'll save for another day, released in 1974. The film was directed by Soji Yoshikawa, the same man who screenwrote for episodes for Part 1 of the Lupin TV show, and more notably being the director of Kirby Right Back At Ya. Also on board was screenwriter Atsushi Yamatoya, who notably worked on films known as pink films during his early filmmaking years, which, if you really want to know, are basically films with nudity and sexual themes. In other words, just porn. Just straight up pornography. Yep, and there goes all our advertisers. Whoop-de-doo! It's not like they're gonna advertise our channel anyway because we don't meet the requirements. Whoop-de-doo! Yuji Ono also returns on board to compose the music for this film, and it is a great listen. The entire soundtrack feels like it fits in really well with each scene. Mystery of Mamo had quite a high budget during its production, with a whopping estimated 500 million yen, which at the time was kinda unheard of for an animated project. It was something comparable to a live action movie at the time. With a rough total of 62,000 cell sheets being used altogether, and in addition to this, the movie also using a thing known as Anime Vision, which was just a modified Vista Vision, but allowed for more high quality picture to be shown on the screen. This movie seems to be one of the most ambitious animated movies out there during the 1970s. Aside from the Battleship Yamato movies, which, mind you, back then were the most expensive anime films ever produced. As much as I'd love to consider Mystery of Mamo one of my favorite movies, does it still hold up to this day? After a very long introduction to what this movie is and everything about Lupin, my apologies, I just love this series with all my heart, it's time to finally delve back into the Mystery of Mamo. Get it? Funny joke, I know. Just start. Okay, one last thing before delving in depth with this movie. I'd like to inform you that there are 5 different versions of this movie, English and Japanese, which are all available on the DVD I own, which was distributed by Discotek Media, and also how I found most of my research for this video. There's the regular Japanese dub that was used for initial release in 1978, and also 4 English dubs featuring the 1979 dub distributed by Toho and released for Japanese flights, the Streamline dub in 1995, the Manga Entertainment dub in 1996, and the Geneon dub in 2003. For this review, I'll be basing my watching experience mainly around the Geneon dub and mainly the Japanese dub as well if I have time. But I want to look at the Geneon dub today because it's my favorite dub cast featuring Tony Oliver voicing Lupin, which fits really well, and also because of the absurd amount of out-of-context moments the dub provides in the anime and the movie. Also a disclaimer, this film does contain nudity, flashing lights, and mentions of a certain controversial political figure who I won't call out because YouTube will fry me. So if you're not into that stuff or you're prone to seizures because of flashing lights, I'd say this movie isn't for you because being real, there's a lot of moments in the movie where flashing lights are present. Also, just a quick spoiler warning for this film. I know this movie is like a fossil at this point, being 45 years old, and I said it at the beginning, but I thought I'd point it out again for people who actually want to watch the film. Okay, let's actually get into the meat and potatoes of this film. I'm done beating around the bush. Also, last chance for people who want to skip the spoilers. Alright, let's actually move into it. Mystery of Mamo starts off with Lupin dying. Just straight up killing Lupin the first minute of the film. What a power move. Yeah, apparently in the first minute of the film, it's established that Lupin was executed, straight up sent to the gallows, possibly for all his crimes he's committed over the series. I mean, I wouldn't blame the executioner, you know? Zenigata doesn't believe this and travels to Transylvania to prove this whole debacle wrong and prove that Lupin is still alive to some capacity. He ends up being right about the whole thing, not before driving a stake through the heart of a decoy Lupin who was there the whole time. Huh. Lupin's still alive and out there, so that begs the question, how is he alive, and what does he intend on doing? With Lupin still alive, Zenigata decides to make haste towards another landmark located in Egypt, without knowing about the fact that all these items have a connection to each other, all being immortality-granting artifacts. In Egypt, Lupin and Jigen find the Philosopher's Stone and make it out of the pyramid, along with Goemon, which throughout the movie he's just there. Yeah, my one main issue with Mystery of Mamo is lack of experimentation with Goemon. I mean, sure, he does get a few good moments here and there, such as where he slices a helicopter or slices someone's head into 3 separate pieces. I just wish his character wasn't sidelined until the very end, you know? Later on, Lupin meets up with Fujiko, where she takes a Philosopher's Stone so she could take it to her client. But oh no, it was a fake and that pisses off Mamo. Now Lupin and the gang are being chased by Mamo's gang, but Lupin does the only reliable thing and commits motor vehicle theft by stealing Fujiko's car to escape Paris. Jigen catches on to this and calls out Lupin on this, claiming that he really did it to protect Fujiko. Just then, it turns out while the trio were escaping Paris, they notice that the police are chasing them down. But suddenly, a giant truck, likely to be associated with Mamo in some capacity, starts to chase down the Lupin gang, but not before the gang manages to maneuver away from the giant pickup truck and watch it fall into a giant river, only for the truck to never be brought up again in the movie. After the entire chase sequence, Lupin and the gang make it to their now destroyed safe house, where Jigen and Goemon get into a heated gamer argument, all because of Fujiko. Because of this, Lupin vows never to talk to Fujiko ever again.
A few moments later.
The three eventually try to make their way toward the ocean, but find the safe house while on their journey. A beat-up Fujiko eventually appears, and a conflict between Lupin, Jigen, and Goemon happen, and the three eventually set off on their own paths. Lupin gets drugged by Fujiko and gets taken back to Mamo's lair. Meanwhile, the goddamn US government eventually gets involved due to Mamo's shenanigans, with them eventually interrogating Jigen and Goemon about the whole debacle. Jigen's a smartass about the whole thing, but gets a clue to where Mamo's lair is. Or at least where to look. So now we're on Mamo's island, which is revealed to be in the Caribbean. Lupin encounters Mamo, the smurf-looking guy he found after an entire chase sequence where Lupin ran through all these famous paintings. Mamo wants Lupin to join him in being granted immortality, hence why Lupin ran into major historical figures like Napoleon and... I can't even finish that sentence. But yeah, it turns out they were all clones created by Mamo. Lupin declines the offer and wants to steal the Philosopher's Stone back from Mamo. The next day, Lupin and Fujiko encounter Mamo again, this time with Mamo becoming so much of a simp for Fujiko that, I shit you not, he forces Lupin onto some sort of crucifix where Mamo goes into Lupin's brain, featuring boobs, more boobs, Fujiko, Pop Rocks, and Zenigata. I literally can't show this scene on YouTube. It's pretty bad. When Mamo decides to enter deeper into Lupin's brain, he discovers nothing but a void. However, while this is happening, Mamo's island is getting nuked by the freaking US government. And also Mamo dies, so that's cool too. Lupin and the gang, along with Fujiko, manage to escape the island, but not before Goemon and Flinch, Mamo's henchmen, fight each other. A piece of Goemon's sword breaks off, ultimately causing him to be ashamed and, from what Goemon can say, not worthy enough. And that's when Goemon disappears until the end of the movie, whoop-de-doo. Meanwhile, Zenigata manages to make it onto land where he's told by the commissioner that he's being let off. And this is also where it's brought up that Zenigata has a family. I don't know, they never really play off this idea again, so why bring it up here? Zenigata isn't having any of it and decides to continue chasing Lupin anyway. Later that night, Lupin, Jigen, and Fujiko are processing as to how and why Mamo did all that with cloning, where Lupin claims that maybe Mamo was a clone himself. Suddenly, the three of them are thrusted into this surreal dream-like world where Mamo claims that the reason why he's been alive this whole time is because he was able to clone himself, allowing him to cause everything that has happened during that time, including every major human event. With this, Mamo also revealed that he managed to clone Lupin, but says that the clone may not be dead and that Lupin might still be a clone. After that entire sequence, Lupin manages to put the pieces together, but not before Mamo manages to brainwash Fujiko and take her away from Lupin and Jigen. Pissed by this, Lupin and Jigen make their way toward Mamo's underground hideout, but not before an earthquake happens, which was caused by the explosion of a nuclear power station. After this, Lupin and Jigen have one final talk with each other about Fujiko and how dangerous this is. The sad thing about this is that this is their last scene together. Lupin wants to go after Fujiko, but Jigen doesn't want Lupin to do this, claiming it to be risky and asking if it'd be worth the risk. Of course, Lupin being Lupin, he makes his way toward the hideout anyway. Once inside Mamo's real lair, or as he was actually called, Howard Lockwood, Lupin arrives only to find a room of nuclear weapons that Mamo has been hiding away. Meanwhile, Mamo and Fujiko are about to have launched those very nukes when suddenly Lupin appears to reveal that he managed to rig the nukes before they were launched. Mamo takes Fujiko to another room, this time a more technological room filled with lasers and a conveyor belt. Struggling to make his way toward Mamo, Lupin eventually finds a piece of Goemon's sword, the same piece that he grabbed before Goemon ran away, in his pockets. Before Mamo fires one last set of lasers, he reveals to Lupin that his clone was the one who died last spring, and after that, Mamo was essentially burnt to death. But this isn't the end, right? As it turns out, Mamo is just one giant brain, a sort of hive mind if you may. Mamo then uses a rocket ship to fly his brain into space. Lupin and Fujiko are able to escape, but while Mamo manages to flee, his brain drifts into the sun due to an explosive Lupin put onto the rocket ship, causing the glass to break. Once out of Mamo's actual lair, Lupin finds Fujiko amongst the rubble of the temple, but before he could do anything, Zenigata shows up for one last hurrah to finally ankle cuff Lupin. After this, Lupin and Fujiko have one oh my god, why? Meanwhile, the government just straight up launches a bunch of missiles toward Mamo's now destroyed lair. Fujiko manages to escape with Jigen in a plane, Goemon says a few words, and Lupin and Zenigata are trying to escape on foot from the onslaught of missiles. And with that, wraps up the Mystery of Mamo, or The Secret of Mamo, or Lupin vs. the Clone, or Jesus Christ, this movie has so many titles, why did they do this? Not a bad plot in the slightest. It's definitely better than a bunch of other Lupin movies and TV specials. Hell, I'd even go as far as to say this is one of the best Lupin films. I feel like it captures the essence of Lupin really well, both with his anime and manga iteration. In terms of dubs, I think it's safe to say that if you want to retain the energy and wackiness of Lupin, watch the Geneon dub featuring Tony Oliver and the rest of the current Lupin gang. Minus Dan Lorge as Zenigata, who was replaced with Doug Earholtz in 2017, which was after the Mystery of Mamo dub. If you're a die-hard fan and want the original Lupin experience, I'd recommend watching the original 1978 Japanese release. I haven't personally watched the other dubs. Again, my opinion is subjective, so you don't necessarily have to agree with me. Mystery of Mamo is quite literally what I'd like to call a surrealist masterpiece, at least in my opinion. Mamo's character, who in the Geneon dub is voiced by Paul St. Peter, is probably one of the most intimidating Lupin villains to date, at least in my opinion, again. He's really the only one who's gotten close to actually killing Lupin by going through his mind, crucifying him to some sort of cross, and electrocuting him so that all of this could work. He nearly started a nuclear warfare that would have caused an apocalypse around the world. He has the technology to not only clone himself, but also clone other people with the right materials. Yet here I am, praising this Smurf-looking freak who simps for Fujiko nonstop, claiming that the two of them will bring a new generation to the world. I don't know though, Mamo's character is so intimidating that not only can I help but appreciate his dedication, but also actively root for Lupin in the long run. And the scene where Mamo's last clone dies is always kinda satisfying to me. Feels like the end of a long battle, or at least what can be considered an era. I'm a bit disappointed that this is probably the only time we get a truly good surreal animated Lupin movie. But hey, I'm glad it exists! It takes the Lupin formula and cranks it up by a lot. In terms of art style, it's a goofy art style that I find pleasing. While I do think Part 3 and Legend of the Gold of Babylon's art style is really good, even going as far as being my favorite, I'd say Mystery of Mamo's art style is quite possibly my second favorite art style from the Lupin franchise. It's so vibrant and nice to look at. There's never a moment in the film where I want to take my eyes off the screen. Aside from all the nudity scenes, and oh, also the flashing light scenes. Jesus Christ, there's a lot of that. There's one specific part in the film that I have mentioned before but skimmed over, where Lupin is being chased by one of Mamo's henchmen, and they eventually start running in paintings, interacting with the environment of the painting around them. Mamo's entire castle before Lupin's first encounter with him is like one of the most surreal things I have ever seen, and it's awesome. I love it so much, and it kind of fits strongly with the surrealist theming of Mystery of Mamo strongly. For 1979, Mystery of Mamo is probably one of the best looking animated films out there. It achieves a surrealist nature extremely well, lending itself well to batshit insane moments that'll happen throughout the movie. It's definitely not only one of my favorite Lupin movies or only one of my favorite animated films, but I can assure you, this movie is probably one of my favorite films of all time. There's so much to unpack here, and it really lends itself well with all it could achieve. To most people, yeah, Mystery of Mamo may not be the best film, but it sure as hell is a damn good movie, despite the flaws it can have. If you haven't watched the film yet, definitely take a look at it. Just make sure it isn't awkward to you. As I've stated before, there are certain scenes where certain people will often feel uncomfortable. So if you're one of those people who don't like that stuff, I don't know what to tell you. Maybe this movie isn't for you. And that's alright. But to me, Lupin III Mystery of Mamo, or its bunch of other names, will always be something I consider peak fiction. But there's still many other ways that people can interpret what they consider peak fiction, and that's okay. It's just a matter of finding it. But really, who's gonna listen to someone on the internet? Maybe the person on the other side of the internet might be a complete idiot or altogether a god. It's all a mystery. That was one of the cheesiest endings I've ever done on this channel, Jesus Christ.